All right, continuing with the Southeast Asia notes, let's talk about human geography. This part of the world has had a lot of population growth and population control problems. When you have India that has over 1 billion people and China who has over 1 billion people, and there are 7 billion people in the entire world, that's a lot of people in 1 or 2 countries. And so they've had a lot of issues with that, of overpopulation. Now, it affects India more often than it affects China because China is a much bigger country. So if we look at population density, and you don't need to write these numbers down, but this is for comparison. China has 386 people per square mile, which is a lot, but not nearly as many as Singapore, for example, has 22,294 people per square mile, but it's much smaller. South Korea, not as small as Singapore, but still smaller than China, has 1,380 people per square mile. India, you can see, is much more populated than China, even though China has more people than India does, with 1,143 people per square mile. Now, to put that in perspective, the United States only has about 94 people per square mile, and China and the United States are relatively the same size in area. So clearly there are a lot of issues. So this is a map of China and all of its provinces. The darker the province, the more population resides in that particular province. So you can see the good majority of Chinese people live on the eastern half of China, kind of the same location where they started to civilize it in ancient history. Remember, off to the west, there are mountains and deserts in the north, and the plateau, the Tibetan plateau. So that's why the population numbers are quite small. So quite honestly, if you cut China in half, because really looking at that map, most of the people live in about half of the size of China, you could double their people per square mile, and that might be a little bit more realistic of a number, but still not as many as Singapore, South Korea, or India. Now, for China, they've tried to maintain some population control. They did this with a one-child policy, and this started over 40 years ago, and it was started so that they could squelch the growth of their population, because the more population you have, the more pollution, the more food and water you need, the more land you need. So it obviously contributes to a lot of other issues. In 2015, this one-child policy that China was so well known for was lifted because they started to see the 40 years and how it affected their population. Their population was getting older because they weren't having as many babies. Their workforce was getting smaller because as the people are getting older and retiring, they don't have as many people to operate their economy, which is based on, over 1 billion people in the country. So when you build factories and you expect a large number of workers to be in your factories, and you don't have those large numbers of people, that causes an economic issue as well. So in 2015, they no longer have a one-child policy. However, a lot of people are still sticking to it because, of course, they can't necessarily afford more than one. Southeast Asia is a very diverse region, and the ethnic groups, the cultures, the languages, really it is completely different. So if we had a panel of Southeast Asian people in our room, many of us, because of our lack of exposure, couldn't tell the difference between a Filipino, a Japanese, a Chinese, or somebody from Thailand or Laos. And so we would have a hard time with that. But the culture is different, the language is different, the history is different. Now, we've had a lot of issues with China and their human rights policies. Tibet which is on the western side of China, really isn't like the rest of China, and they are free to practice Buddhism. The rest of China really it goes by the atheistic rule of no religion allowed since they are communist. But between the freedom of religion, between the one-child policy rules and the women's rights issues, we've had a lot of issues with the way China has treated their people. So some of the policies that went on during the one-child policy was, well, there was a preference to have males. And so a lot of times the females, if they were born and they saw that it was a female, they would kill the baby instantly, because if they could only have one child, they wanted it to be a male. They would go to all sorts and lengths to maintain that one-child policy rule, and they did all sorts of birth control methods. Some were more brutal than others for women, and if you had a second child, they didn't always recognize that as a person, a citizen. So women weren't treated right. Different religions haven't been freely treated and treated correctly. And of course, then humans, if they weren't considered to be a citizen. So make sure you watch the human rights video and answer the questions. And you can find those on the Canvas calendar about human rights in China. Well, human rights altogether. Religion. I already mentioned that, China didn't really have a freedom of religion, but there are several religions that flourish in this part of the world. Islam is going to be orange on my map, so you might want to write that down or color code it. And the countries that practice Islam in this part of the world are Indonesia, Malaysia, Brunei, Bangladesh, and the Maldives. Now, Indonesia has an asterisk beside it because 99 to 100% of the people are Muslims in Indonesia. So it has one of the highest percentages in all of the world. Christianity also is in this part of the world, not as common, but the Philippines, South Korea, and East Timor, or Timor-Leste. And that's because the Philippines were first colonized by Spain, who was Catholic, and then we, meaning the United States, gained control of the Philippines in the Spanish-American War. And so, of course, we are Christian, and so they have remained Christian because of that colonization and connection. South Korea also has a strong connection with the United States, and they practice Christianity. And East Timor, since it was colonized by Portugal, they were Catholic, and so they are a Christian country as well. And so they're going to be yellow on my map. Hinduism is only practiced in India, where it was founded, and Nepal. Remember, back from chapter 3, Hinduism, they worship many spirits, but there's only one God, Brahman. There's the concepts of dharma and karma based all on good conduct, and they believed in reincarnation so that you might need to have more than one life to live a pure enough life to have a soul that's absorbed into that ultimate spirit of Brahman. And that's going to be gray on our maps. Buddhism is the most widely practiced religion, quote unquote religion in this part of the world, because Buddhism is actually a philosophy. It's practiced in Thailand, Myanmar, Tibet, which isn't a country, but it's on the western side of China, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, Mongolia, Sri Lanka, and Bhutan. Remember, Buddhism began in India, and you can see it's not really practiced in India today, and it was founded by the person known as Siddhartha Gautama, also known as the Enlightened One or Buddha. And they're going to be green on our map. Taoism or Taoism, in our book it was listed as Taoism, but in a lot of geographic books it's Taoism with a T, practiced in China and Taiwan. Taoism, remember, began in China in the 6th century BC, and Tao or Tao is the proper way of behaving, and it's really in line with nature. Confucianism is only practiced in China. Remember, that was more of a philosophy as well, based on Confucius, and it was a code of ethics and how to behave. Shinto is a religion that's only practiced in Japan. It has no founder. They don't really have gods, but they have spirits known as kamis, and these kamis are found in all things in nature. So very similar to Greek mythology, where you had an ocean god, a harvest god, that sort of thing. And atheism officially is practiced in China and North Korea. Why is this the case? Well, both of these countries declare that they are a communist country and they don't allow religion by law. And they're going to be blue. So Shinto will be red on our map. Atheism is going to be blue. So if you can color code your map on the back side of the map that we labeled with the country names, there are 3 countries that are Christianity, 1 that is Shinto, a lot are Buddhists, okay? Mongolia, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, Singapore. Some are Islam. A couple are Hinduism, India and Nepal. And then look at China, how it's multiple. On the west side, it's Buddhism in Tibet. Officially, it's atheist, which is the blue, but they also practice the philosophies of Confucianism, pink, and Taoism, which is purple. Thailand is green because they practice Buddhism and Taoism, so they're both colors. All right, the language of this region, again, is very diverse, just like the people. Chinese, remember we learned that they use pictographs or ideographs, and so these characters are very difficult to learn. Chinese is written, again, top to bottom and right to left. These are 3 different languages, Chinese, Korean, and Japanese. You can see they're similar yet different, but they all use characters. Japanese and Korean are very similar in their grammar structure, and English is used quite frequently as an official business language in this part of the world. So your extra credit in your packet, you can use the code at the bottom of the worksheet for the Chinese prefixes and suffixes and translate those and put those in for 3 points. And then on the other side is a crossword puzzle, and there's a word bank at the bottom. That's also 3 points. So you can turn that in the day before or the day of the test.